with recording two things, but no, I think that's fine. Okay, cool. I'll give everybody a minute to jump in. Great. Okay, awesome. So I think we can get started since we have a crew here, and we'll see who else kind of wants to jump in. So Shelby, do you have any updates that we want to start with first?
No major updates for this week. Just a reminder, I guess, like a FYI, we will be in Amsterdam next week, a week from today. We will have just concluded our fun little offsite as well, which is super exciting. I'm super pumped. I cannot wait for Amsterdam.
Yeah, for sure.
And yeah, but on the governance side, I guess there haven't been any new proposals to discuss today. Just primarily, I think our plan today was to go over your amazing post, Abby, from a few weeks ago now, of the next steps for the RadicleDAO, which would be super great for you to go over and discuss. And then, yeah, I guess I can provide a quick little update on our redelegation project at the end if we have time.
Yeah, cool. I think that sounds great. And we have some people who have already participated in the forum post of the next phase of the RadicleDAO as well. And so they, like Angie and Louie, can feel free to raise their hands if you all like to introduce yourselves and or join the conversation, just feel free. So yeah, for everybody who's here, if you want to join, just like raise your hand to speak, and maybe just drop a note in the meetings channel of governance, and we can kind of get you added here. But yeah, let's just kind of, I think it would be great to walk through the next phase of the RadicleDAO post and then kind of just like have a general open discussion about what the next steps look like for this, since we've already started on that, which could get everybody, you know, up to speed and kind of like aligned about what we're doing there. Cool. So I'll kind of just like dive in. I wish I could share my screen here, but instead I'll just share the discourse post so everybody can kind of.
I already shared it in the meetings channel.
Of course you did. I love it. Great. So if anybody wants to follow along with me, I'll kind of just be going through this post. So we posted this about 2 weeks ago. And I'd also recommend that everybody read the predecessor to this post, which was the path to increasing decentralization within Radicle, which was kind of like, you know, the first time that we really spoke about this vision publicly, about how we see Radicle being a community-owned and governed, self-sustaining, free and open source project. This has kind of always been the Radicle vision. It's something that's like very unique and different about Radicle, and so it's been really exciting to see how that vision has grown over the last year. And so this post is kind of basically like our way of saying that we're starting this official transition to the DAO. Over the last year, we've formed a DAO and decentralized a network with Rad. And so now is, I guess I would say, kind of more of the social transition and also technical transition to move most of Radicle's core development to the DAO. And starting to spec out what operational, technical, and social scaffolding is going to be required for managing this decentralized network of funding and development. So it starts with just like a little bit of a look back on our governance over the last year. For those who have been actively participating in the forums and in the working group calls, this is not new to you. But you know, we created the Radicle Governance Working Group, which has since transitioned to the Radicle Governance Core Team, which Shelby and I are contributors to, which has been really fun to be able to kind of start with this like emergent community working group and have that form into a core team that's now funded by the foundation. We deployed, you know, 1 million of capital to the Radicle Grants Program. Actually, the most recent thing that happened since our last working group call, which I'll give a call out for, is that we deployed and executed the governance proposal for the Ecosystem Growth Fund. I actually will give that as a call out. I think that happened after our last working group call. But NASAR worked really hard to get this proposal together, which basically has now deployed 500K of capital into a multi-sig that's controlled by the Radicle growth team and committee. And NASA formed like a really awesome group of advisors to kind of start strategizing around how we can deploy capital from the Treasury in more targeted and focused ways, specifically for growth initiatives. So that was also like a huge win in the community. And so very excited to see what NASR's thinking of there. And we also started deployed the removal of the name registration fee from the Radicle registrar, so it doesn't take Rad to register ENS names yet. And so now we're really looking forward and starting to do a lot more strategic, proactive thinking about like what is the next phase of the RadicleDAO. And this post starts to go through the initial thinking and proposal behind what success looks like and what our governance goals are for the project. This is very much influenced from conversations within the Radicle Foundation, which is the nonprofit entity that's in charge of kind of like stewarding the progressive decentralization of the network, and is definitely something that we think is like the general feeling of our team, but is also something that we're very interested in kind of continuing to refine, and hope that in this process of us diving into this work, we'll also kind of clarify what our vision is as a community, not just as core contributors. And so the goal here is just, again, to really coordinate and fund all project development via the DAO, and have the Radicle Foundation, which currently does that job, to have it exist in a limited capacity, more as an entity that safeguards Radicle trademarks and accomplish any offline activities that the DAO can't do, and use this Radicle Treasury as the asset to fund the growth of the project for the foreseeable future. And ensure a resilient ecosystem that has better distributed decision-making power and influence, to ensure that we're kind of growing our network of contributors that have an active voice in the project, instead of just relying on kind of the current distribution of influence that we had with the launch of the token within the core team. So there's a lot of like really interesting governance goals there about how can we get more contributors earning and having more influence in the DAO. How can we have governance that doesn't suffer from the participation issues that we're currently experiencing? We have a pretty low participation rate. On average, we have only about like 5% of participation from 17 unique addresses. So the network is still pretty centralized in different pools, and Shelby's delegation work has like really fixed that, and we've already seen like really great shifts in distribution of influence. But I think we're really trying to think of how can we distribute influence in more active ways. And how can we also ensure that our DAO is technically, politically, and socially resilient, that is uncapturable and resistant to collusion? I think this is like one of the necessary pieces of decentralized code collaboration infrastructure, is that its source of funding is also uncapturable and resistant as well. So we're on a pretty like tight timeline, and Louis also called out in the comments that we're wondering what's driving it. It was something that we think that having a proactive timeline for is better to kind of like kickstart the work. And so we really want to make sure that we're prioritizing this transition and starting to really put energy into the different pieces. I'll pause there. Does anybody have like questions about kind of like that overall vision before I get into the work streams? I'm happy to kind of like talk through any of those points or reflections, like looking forward, or if anybody has feedback on our ideas and like what we think our governance goals should be. Happy to take feedback now before diving into the rest. Okay, cool. Then I'll keep moving forward. So to start tackling this very large transition, we started speccing out work in these things called work streams. And so these work streams just like represent important work to be done to meet Radicle's governance goals. And instead of being defined by deliverables at the point in time, they're being defined as sets of guiding questions that will inform the work for each work stream. So the reason being, the reason that we split it into different work streams is that there's a lot of, like, I would say, larger threads, strategic threads that need to be pursued to, in my opinion and other people's opinion, to effectively coordinate this work. And I can kind of like dive into what those are. Some of them have more explicit deliverables, like the first work stream, which is just like the organizational design, and others are kind of more, will have deliverables that are more emergent as we start kind of diving into them. But the way that these work streams work, and I know that this got a lot of questions, is that each of these work streams will basically be followed by their own post with the goal of kind of creating a little strike team working group around the work stream itself. And so we already have contributors from the Radicle core team and from the community who are interested in contributing there. But the goal is that these work streams will kind of have their own working groups stewarding the work forward to as a way to kind of like manage the work in tandem instead of just making this all the responsibility of the governance team, because we also would love to see some of the answers to these guiding questions come from the community, if that makes sense. So I'll be responsible for trying to make sure that each of these work streams gets a next post that takes it into the next phase. But then we're really looking for community engagement and contributor engagement to these work streams so we can kind of start going about the answers of these questions together, as a community, as a DAO. So next, ideally, we're going to be looking for a working group lead or co-leads for each work stream. And so there, that's also going to be kind of like an opportunity to get engaged. And I'll explicitly call out where we're looking for people to engage as well. So to go through the work streams, the first, which is kind of like the most obvious and one that I could say most well spec'd right now, is the proposed organizational design for this next phase of the RadicleDAO. So ideally, we want to transition, well, the objective, not ideally, it's just like the objective is to transition all of our foundation-funded core teams and foundation responsibilities to a DAO-funded organizational structure. So core teams would then become self-managed entities that are funded via the Treasury, whose budgets and objectives require community review and approval. And so this is a super interesting objective when you think about it in terms of what this means for the project. But really it comes with, how do we replace the coordination that's happening between the Foundation Council and the core teams who negotiate budgets and objectives on a month-to-month basis? How do we replace that with the DAO while ensuring that these core teams are able to work together, achieve cohesion, and are able to, access funds readily and seamlessly? And so the goal here is to support a ecosystem of core teams, which are development teams that are coordinating and maintaining different pieces of the stack, with coordination and structure instead of hierarchy and control. So this requires a lot of technical and social infrastructure in place that will allow each core team to manage their own relationship with the DAO. For example, it would be really hard if each month each core team was submitting a budget as an on-chain governance proposal. And so this organizational design will probably be a mix of social processes, off-chain governance structures, and maybe more upgrades to our on-chain governance process that will allow us to, do this development team budgeting in an efficient way. So there's a ton of, I won't go through each guiding question because I don't think people want to hear me talk that much, but I'd recommend everybody kind of just dive into it. And if anybody wants me to dive into the thinking of specific ones, just drop it in the chat or raise your hand and we can discuss. But it's very interesting to kind of start thinking about what accountability structures and social processes we're going to want to introduce and potentially require from the core teams that are part of our project to make sure that there's like a healthy and trusted relationship between our contributors and our community members. So this is everything about like how does the community express voice? When do they voice? How are they able to resolve conflicts with the core teams? How are the core teams able to keep working in a way that's efficient and seamless? How do we ensure efficiency, transparency, and accessibility? And how do we set and report? How do core teams kind of manage themselves within this structure? So there's a lot of really cool things brewing here. Angie and I specifically have been chatting about a lot of different approaches to this. Louis, coming from the community, already had a couple of really interesting thoughts. So I think that there's kind of a strike team forming around like what this initial proposal is, as it's something that we've been thinking about for a long time. And it's definitely going to be starting from the contributor first, making sure that we're building a system that is really built for our current contributors. So there's also going to be like a lot of learning that we want to do from people who are currently involved. So that's the first one. I think that there's a temperature check for that work stream almost ready to be posted. So everybody will be able to see kind of like the next steps that we're thinking about going in that direction. So that's very exciting. And of course, there's going to be more room for participation as well. But that one's pretty well led, since it's something that we've been thinking about. Any questions on that work stream? I guess I'll stop at the end of each work stream just to make sure that I'm not talking too much. Anybody have anything? No? Okay, cool. So moving on, the next one is distribution of ownership, which is, wow, a really big work stream. And so I'm excited to chat about it with everybody, because it's definitely going to need a lot of feedback. So basically, we think that it's necessary to devise and implement an active strategy for distributing RAD among network stakeholders. And by network stakeholders, I mean contributors, users, ecosystem partners. But basically, how can we distribute power in a token voting network? You could say that power is token allocation, to make sure that there's a higher level of stakeholder alignment beyond kind of what was distributed at Genesis. And so for contributors, this is like, how do we use token rewards to attract, retain, and incentivize contributors and squads working within the Radicle network? For users, this is like, how does, airdrops, like what is beyond the airdrop for us? How can we intentionally allocate tokens to users to support adoption and growth? For example, Nassar, you're talking about something like this right now within the Ecosystem Growth Fund. Like, how can we incentivize usage of drips by allocating users RAD, which is like a really cool idea. And so I feel like you're gonna maybe really want to contribute to this work stream. And the final one is like ecosystem partners. Like, how can we activate different DAO to DAO collaborations, like token swaps, to build more resilient ecosystem partnerships to be supported with token distributions? And so this is a heavy one, and it has a lot of stuff, and we want the distribution of ownership to happen from the Treasury. And so I think definitely looking for more feedback here on how much we want to strategize, how much we want to experiment, and maybe some other ideas that people have here. It seems like Boredom and Nassar, you guys might have some thoughts on this, so would love to hear.
Go ahead now.
Nope, I think I'll be covered in the kind of where I am. I guess, yeah. We're looking at an individual program where we would do airdrops, and we're looking at doing token swaps, as Wonderverse mentioned in the previous call. But yeah, so I'm very interested in this work stream, but nothing to add. And also, do I sound like Barry White or just really sick? Which
You
is
just
it?
sound sick.
Oh,
You
great.
got a little bit of a stuffy nose.
Yeah, right.
So with the ecosystem growth stuff, like, how do you, I guess, like I'm also with the distribution of ownership strategy, like for contributors, it kind of makes sense because you're developing a strategy for, I guess, like attracting, retaining, and incentivizing, as I said. But with users, I'm always torn between incentivization and have like a lot of mixed feelings about, not even mixed feelings, just like, I don't really know what my opinion is on like how one can measure how an incentivization like positively impacts adoption and growth. Have you thought about that and like maybe do you have any idea of like what works and what doesn't work, or is there like alongside of this work stream some research we can do to kind of inform like what user incentivization we do, kind of like best practices, like what we want to do and what we don't want to do with user incentivization?
Yeah, I'm sure there's many opinions on this, and I've not at all done like the full extent of research to to have a strong opinion here. I think just over the last few years, as I've kind of experienced a bunch of airdrops and the things that I saw work well in Web 2, I think I'm quite keen to see token rewards go to those that help grow the network. That's quite a popular strategy in Web 2, and I'd like for us to do a similar thing. So that's probably the stuff that I'm going to be exploring. Does that make sense, or do I need to elaborate on what I mean by that?
No, I think it totally makes sense. I think it's going to be nice to like take those learnings and kind of use them and put them back into this work stream as a way for us, because like basically any user incentivization will either actually go through the growth teams, and since that's what you guys will be kind of like in charge of as a core team. So like maybe that's what it is, or it'll kind of like go to the community. And so I'm interested to know like what, if we want to start like really thinking about like what we want our strategy to be there. But I think that since it's like forming in your team first, it's going to be really cool for you guys to kind of like pave the way there, since you really are like the first hand on the users. And so I think it would be really important to have you as part of this work stream.
Sounds good.
And also like LA coming from the Drips team has expressed interest as well, since Drips is also like another product that's like really ready to kind of grow. And so I think that we'll be able to see some incentivization there. And Boredom, I know that we've chatted about a lot of different like DAO collaborations as well, and how we can kind of be like embedding more distribution of ownership within our ecosystem partnerships, which is also very interesting.
Yeah, I was just gonna mention, and this is something I talked with Shelby about today, so it's like not super well like frameworked or anything like that. But one idea that came up was so token swaps. I think coming from a treasury makes sense. They're probably likely gonna usually be like larger in size. Shelby and I were kind of circling around this idea of like utilizing sub-DAOs as a vehicle for sort of curating the ownership or the community of RAD token holders. And what I mean by that is let's say in the second or third wave of grants as a sub-DAO, or in NASA's sub-DAO that he just set up, if we were to allocate RAD as a means to pay out to contributors, those contributors getting paid in RAD are in some sense, by virtue of the committees, those sub-DAOs having their own committees and those being sort of democratically elected, through representation, they're sort of curating the ownership of RAD into people who, more than likely, or more likely than others, have a sort of vested interest in Radicle as a protocol. That was just like one idea I wanted to throw out there, because I think it might be a useful sort of like in the hierarchy of distributing RAD. Like if token swaps are at the top as being these sort of like large dumps that come out of the treasury, there could be something underneath that is more targeted and sort of like maybe smaller in size, but like greater in sort of like variety of who it actually goes out to.
Yeah, I think Abby mentioned a similar thing to me with regards to how she'd want the next proposal for Ecosystem Growth Fund to go. So I definitely think that makes a lot of sense. I guess one thing I'd add to that as well is I guess I'm keen on exploring, and it's one of the things I'm doing as part of speaking to Wonderverse, and using that token swap as more of a partnership play than a kind of treasury diversification kind of play. I'm kind of keen to see whether in the future whether those types of partnerships will happen via the Ecosystem Growth Fund, and whether it makes sense for like the kind of committee there to coordinate that thing over always having to go to the Treasury. So that's another thing I'm quite interested in, which would end up meaning probably a fairly large fund would be coordinated in that way. But I still feel like that makes, if you look at how large kind of, I guess, organizations operate, it still makes sense that it would go towards sub rather than going to kind of global governance. But yeah, that's one thing I'd add to that as well in terms of RAD tokens.
Yeah, I actually think it's really interesting to also like bring up this like treasury diversification is one thing, but then it's also like exchange of governing power, and like I think that it's very interesting to think of where that would sit, and this goes into like the next work stream is actually a good segue into it, which is like how do we want to distribute influence within these core teams, because I think that Radicle's governance is like really made up of its contributors. And so maybe instead of like this, how do we empower the individual? It's like, how do we empower the core team? And thus, and do you know what I mean? So like treating the core teams as the units that should be distributed ownership versus just like the DAO to the individual, and kind of looking at it as like more of this, like, how do we empower each core team with ownership and influence that then they can distribute in the ways that they see fit, which I also think is like a really interesting approach for sure. So I think that there's a lot to explore here. And what I'm hearing is that it's probably, since there's so many different places, I feel like what I want to do is like start a temperature check this and start tagging the people who are interested in kind of leading different things, and kind of maybe trigger like an open discussion to help form where we want to go. Because for me, the deliverables are a little bit more hazy here. And I'd love to kind of have people in charge of either running experiments for different segments or starting to kind of contribute more to like how we want to look at strategy here, with the goal of coming to an action plan of like 1 or 2 deliverables that we can start working on in parallel to this transition of the DAO to start stress testing some of this strategy. Do we think that sounds like a good next step to kind of like take these guiding questions, maybe split them up a little bit more in a temperature check, and then kind of have people who are interested start adding thoughts, and then maybe kind of review those in like a separate community call, like a working session? Fordham and Nassar?
I'm down for that. Yeah, if there's a temperature check, I'm super down to write notes and contribute.
Nice.
Yeah, sounds good. And yeah, sorry, I was just going to say, and I always kind of do this, is that I think so. I think this is Luke's first governance call, and I've spoken. He's joined kind of the growth team. He's kind of leading as a growth leader, and yeah, I guess I'm always keen to kind of hear from new contributors how they feel about kind of these things in particular, like distribution of ownership. We still need to kind of work out like token rewards side of like compensation, and yeah, so I'm kind of keen to hear from Luke as well, kind of how this stuff sounds to him, I guess.
Do you want to come on the stage now, Luke? Oh, there you are. Perfect.
Hey everyone, can you hear me?
You sound a little bit robot-y, but I think so.
Oh, okay, wait a second. Let me switch to my.
Is that just me?
No,
This,
it's the same for me.
yeah, it's definitely Luke, but this is what happens when you put people on the spot.
Give me 1 second.
So should I save these types of moves to the end of calls, Abby?
No. This is exactly what we want to do, which is kind of just like start diving into each work stream. So this is like totally fine. We still have 30 minutes, so, and we only have 2 more work streams to go through, so it's like totally cool.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're a little bit quiet, but I think I can hear you.
Okay. So now, what was
Oh,
the
wait.
Yeah, I can hear you.
what was the question?
Oh, sorry. The question is that like I don't know if you've seen the document that has been shared around kind of the next phase of RadicleDAO, and kind of distribution of ownership. As someone who's like new to the DAO and started contributing, and we still need to talk through like token rewards. How are you thinking about what would you like to see, I guess, from the RadicleDAO in terms of rewarding contributors? How do you have any thoughts on it? Is kind of what I was asking.
Yeah. So I'm very new to Web3, and for me it is exciting to have some like reward rewards, to get invested and think a little bit more long term rather than just a short term contributor. But that's kind of my initial thought. And to be honest with you, I haven't given so much thought to this around contribution. I'm more focused on like onboarding right now, but I know it's not really related to this. So does that help?
Yeah, no, it's cool. I think have a read the document and let's talk about it kind of this month. I think it's stuff that we do need to talk through anyway. And then yeah, maybe in the next month's call, it makes sense to come and share kind of your perspective. If that's cool. Yeah, cool.
Nice. Cool. Awesome. Well, so yeah, I think we can use that to kind of segue into the next work stream, which I think is equally as interesting, which is basically the distribution of influence. And so I think that this one's actually coming from, I mean, research into this space and kind of coming to the opinion that I think that it's really necessary to design and implement a strategy for distributing non-financialized governing power within the Radicle ecosystem, especially if we're going to be leaning more into off-chain means of governance. And so I think that the reason is that influence in the project is currently disproportionately distributed among early team members and supporters, like rad holders. And so like while this whole distribution of ownership thing is like now being actively discussed in the previous work stream, I think that we also need to increase or at least kind of like encourage more active, diverse participation within the DAO by giving people, a way to actually show their voice. Over half of RAD core team contributors don't have RAD right now, just because of how our decentralized has happened. And I think that that's an issue. And so I don't think that should also mean that these individuals don't have a voice. And I think like the number one thing that we should have is making sure that contributors and active participants in the network like are able to have a voice that they can use. So basically the goal here is to develop or implement or experiment with new mechanisms, systems, tools for distributing influence that can be deployed in the current Radicle governance system. The reason I say current is because our on-chain governance system is, powered by smart contracts that require upgrades. And so while potentially like an on-chain upgrade out of our governor alpha, we're a compound fork, is something that we can see in the future. I think that there's like a lot of really cool ways that we can experiment with distributing influence within the network without that upgrade yet. And so, I think that it would be really cool to design a layer that kind of like interops this like off-chain layer that interops with our current token voting system. And so this one is really more like of a mechanism design question. I think that there's like a lot of really cool things that we can do here. And the goal is to really design like a dynamic and decentralized system that will scale as the ecosystem grows. I can see us using NFTs or existing tooling like Coordinate. There's a lot of DAO toolings that are, even like Station was kind of like introducing these contributor NFTs. But I think the question here will kind of be establishing more of an effective means of like membership within the DAO, and then using that primitive to kind of build a better system for then distributing voting power that can be used potentially in this new, not potentially, but definitely in this new organizational design that we're proposing. So all these work streams are like very closely linked. But the goal here is to kind of like focus in on like what the design could be and what mechanism we could start introducing now to distribute influence to the people who deserve influence in our current system, but also create a system that is more dynamic. So not just like another static distribution of influence, but a introduction of a system that we can like mold and parameterize and kind of design to grow with us as our community scales. So it's interesting here. I think that this is something that could be really cool to emerge from the community. I've had like some really interesting conversations with like the Gnosis Guild team about some of the standards that they're presenting, such as the upgradable NFT standard that they're launching. Stuff like that. Another project like OtterSpace is like specifically focusing on like building a better membership model for DAOs. Like that's another idea. Station, for example, has contributor NFTs. And so this will kind of be like more of like a product-driven work stream, which I think will be really fun. And I'm definitely like looking for kind of like a community group to kind of like take this and run with it, with a proposal, potentially boredom, it being funded by a Radicle grant. You know, that's kind of like, I think the ideal of like where I'd want to see this going forward. So very interesting, obviously very undefined, but a little bit more structured in terms of like its strategy, but it's, again, it's like kind of more mechanism design, if that makes sense. So this should be really cool. Anybody have questions on this one or comments?
Yeah, I guess I love this one. I think, you know, Abby, as those of you who follow along here consistently know, Abby and I have been working a lot over the last few months on kind of coordinating a big redelegation process from larger RAD holders and trying to make sure that the RAD that is available for participation, governance, and voting and influence is being used, and that has been successful, I would say, for the most part. Abby, we've gotten a pretty good response from the folks we've reached out to. Redelegation, on the active delegate platform, like I've seen people's, the active delegates who've announced themselves and have been, participating, their delegate or the RAD tokens delegated to them have been growing, which is super exciting to see. There's still, I think, maybe more to do there, and that's not an end-all solution, I think, which is why I really love this idea of like a non-financialized layer, and more like contribution-based layer of governance and influence available to a broader portion of the community, which is super exciting. So really excited to see what comes out of there.
Yeah, I think that, sorry, Nassar, go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say that. I think I'm actually probably most excited about this one as well, in the sense that I guess the two things that I'm most excited to see is I guess not coordinating with core teams and core team leads as if like they're. I think when we get close to that and we feel like core teams are coordinating with each other and we're not trying to coordinate token holders, I think for me that would be a massive win. So I'm super excited about that. And then I think the other component that I'm like super curious about is how much of a disconnect between those who are governing it and running it and those who own the network can there be? I think that's still a big open question in my head. So I'm kind of curious on those two lenses in this one.
Yeah, for sure. I think that there's like a lot of stuff to figure out here, and it's probably like unboxing. Like, I think the goal here will be to do something that's like, it can be emergent and like lightweight that like works, but not getting too much in the weeds of like qualifying contributions and everything. Like, I find that like sometimes like there's like this super technical approach to this, which is like source cred. You know what I mean? I don't know if you guys know source cred, but it was like this algorithmic approach to like determining influence. Then there's kind of like the social approach, like coordinate. And then there's like, I don't know, like some other mixture of this, which is like, I think based in membership models of like being able to create these like tiers of membership within an organization that then have very clear processes for onboarding and offboarding, which then directly relate to kind of more autonomous distributions of influence that then can be kind of molded by the community, I think is like my goal. And I think that NFTs probably will be the way to do this. But it's definitely like, because it's like the design of the system, the implementation of the system, and then the maintenance of the system, and who's responsible for that in the DAO. So it's definitely like a big thing in itself, but I'm glad that both of you guys are interested in it. I think that what we can do, like, I feel like I know that there's like a couple projects who have approached me about this work stream who are interested in trying to help us design this. And so how this work stream goes potentially is via a Radicle grant in which we have a team that we trust, that we want to work with to kind of like go about and implement it for us with kind of like feedback, or it's something that kind of forms internally that we kind of design ourselves. So I'll probably focus on getting the distribution of ownership temperature check up first, while kind of like looping in more community members who potentially and like looking and kind of actively seeking what DAO tooling people are providing tools for this stuff.
Yeah, I have a really quick question. And this, I'm not expecting an answer, and I actually don't think it's possible. But like when you brought up the concept of NFTs, it made me think of the portion of Drips which is called community, whereby you create like some arbitrary number of NFTs. But the one problem with the contract is that it requires people to buy the NFTs. And I'm wondering if we couldn't just rewrite that to have like a switch that says, okay, don't make this an NFT that you buy, make it one that I manage and can airdrop to people because they contribute. Like, it seems like we're like one step away from just having it like being done on like Radicle. But I could be wrong. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Like,
for sure. I mean, I
there's a
think
lot
that
of
could.
there backwards, basically.
Mhm.
Yeah, if I'm probably going to be the one that's kind of pushing towards more, more traditional structures. I think I've started seeing DAOs, and I don't think it's a popular opinion at the moment, but I've started seeing DAOs as like internet native companies, and I think like a lot of these governance and coordination challenges have been solved before, and there's some new things to be found there. But I think I'm fair. A lot of what I've seen in terms of meta governance and NFT based and community based governance stuff, I've seen it fail. So I'm probably going to be the kind of, I guess, granddad in the room in these discussions, but I'm sure I'll be balanced out by people who are much more keen to play with this stuff. I hope that's okay. I feel like I should disclose that up front.
I think we all need a granddad in a room. So I think that will be very, very helpful.
There you go.
Nice.
I feel, it was fine when I was calling myself a granddad. When you accepted me as the granddad, it did hurt a little bit. But let's continue.
All right, granddad. Cool. Okay, so yeah, I definitely think that this one's really meaty. I'm also very interested to know like what the dog fooding plan is, and so maybe that should be kind of like in addition, like another guiding question that we should add here, which is like, can this be done with Radicle? And I think that should underpin all of these discussions as well. And I know is already kind of part of the organizational design work stream, which is like how and what pieces of the Radicle stack should be employed in the new org design. What should be required for core teams, like managing orgs or communities on trips, and so that can kind of all be part of the same conversation. So since we're coming up on time, I just want to keep moving into the last piece of the stack that's pretty short. I mean, the last piece of the last work stream, which is like the reevaluation of the RadicleDAO stack. So underpinning all of this is like understanding like what tooling tooling processes and parameters we're currently using to run our DAO. And so, of course, we're evaluating new tooling, but it's also kind of evaluating our current tooling and making sure that like we're suggesting the optimized stack for our community members. And so Shelby and I are embarking on this like big landscape review of different DAO tooling providers. And we want to start to improve Radicle governance processes. So we've already had calls with like Boardroom, Wonderverse was today, Parcel, Station, Utopia, tons of really interesting stuff out there. And so Shelby and I think, are going to be taking lead on kind of providing like a reflection on these demos, as well as like the recordings for people who would like to listen in on what we think and what improvements we want to make to the Radicle stack today. And then setting a design criteria for the Radicle DAO stack tomorrow, right? So like there's also like parameterization, like we have this like open discussion on like upgrading our governance contracts to better reflect that the Treasury holds 50% of RAD, and so the 4% participation threshold might be a little bit unavailable to us sometimes, and that's why we had to resubmit the Radicle Grants program and stuff. So there's also discussions there. Shelby's doing some like really awesome research right now into like participation parameters across different DAOs. And so I think she'll be sure to loop that into this work stream as well. So the governance team is going to lead this one, but we'd love feedback and participation in the community demos is I feel like the best way to kind of participate in this right now, because it's where we're kind of like evaluating it together. So feedback is very welcome. Any questions on that? No? Okay, cool. So yeah, so we had a couple of responses here. I started answering, but I have a couple more to answer. So I'm going to be dropping more comments in here, but as I said, for what's next, please share feedback or questions directly in this discourse forum, or wait for the workstream post to break out. We really want, this is like definitely like a community, we want this to be a community driven process. This whole transition is, as you've just heard, there's a lot to cover. And so we really want to make sure that we're going about this collectively. If you're interested in contributing to a specific workstream, also drop it in this discourse forum. I think it's like a really great way so that when, even if I'm creating the temp checks for some of these, it's great to like tag people. Again, we want each workstream to be led by someone, and we're very interested in community members leading. So there's plenty of room for participation. So feel free to just like drop them there. But yeah, so just keep looking out for the next discourse post for each of these work streams. And then I'm sure each work stream will start creating their own processes for syncing, maybe a new text channel, or their own community call. I think it's going to be up to the people who are participating to kind of like steward that direction. So there's no further questions. I'll end there.
I can't believe I forgot this, Abby. I forgot to plug the governance updates newsletter that we launched also this month.
Gosh, yes.
So, folks, I just dropped the link in the meetings channel. We have been kind of tooling together a little newsletter, that a bi-weekly newsletter that kind of is a collection of current active, like information on active proposals, if there are any kind of upcoming things to look out for on the proposal front, and then just kind of general updates about, the governance core team, events happening, like what meeting reminders. Then there's at the bottom, there's like a little, like a collection of like the main governance resources, which is always nice to have quick at hand. So yeah, that is again a bi-weekly email. So it will not be a great thing to rely on for live updates. I just wanted to like call that out very clearly, because I think I just want to make sure people for live got like updates on voting for proposals and everything. We still have our Radicle Governance Twitter, which I told Abby today, has more followers than the Maker Governance Twitter and the Uniswap Governance Twitter, which I'm super proud of. And we also have, if you haven't noticed already on Discord, the governance updates announcements channel. And that is exclusively, it's basically a mirror of the Twitter, but it's like, you can think of these channels as like ticker channels of just reminders of, here this proposal's live, here are the links, a reminder, and then the result is basically kind of the design of these channels. The purpose of these channels is just to get everyone the main information when they need it, reminders, and yes, results. So yeah, those but yeah, the newsletter is still great, I think, for other kind of discussions and other little reminders about the governance working group, or the governance core team. Sorry, still working on getting rid of the working group title in my head. But yes, so just wanted to plug that quick before we hop off. And yeah, great to see you, some more subscribers.
Yeah, that's awesome, Shelby. Thank you so much for coordinating all of this. I think it's like really great to have like just like a streamlined way to kind of keep up to date with all of that. And I think it's like getting really clean, and it's really impressive that we have a lot of followers on our governance Twitter. So that's super cool because we're going to have a lot of governance stuff coming over the next couple of months. Cool. Awesome. So I think that covers everything, right, Shelby?
Yes, I think so. I'm also just dropping for funsies. If you haven't followed the governance Twitter, there's the link. But yeah, other than that, I think that pretty much wraps it up. I guess just a reminder, as always, I take some rough notes and collect any links that are shared in all of these calls, and then we will post a recording of the call and along with the notes. Hopefully tomorrow, but definitely within the next few days. And yeah, just for a good clean record of all of the fun stuff we discuss in these calls. But yeah, I'll write a reminder in the meetings channel for when it's ready, so folks can take a look at it when it's ready.
Cool. Awesome. So yeah, with that, let's end here. Thank you everybody who joined today. We'll post the recording up on YouTube for anybody who missed it, and Shelby will share the notes. And yes, Brandon, we should probably add that to radicle.xyz/community. Maybe I'll make an issue for that right now. Oh, you said you'll do this. Okay, great. Cool. Awesome. Thank you everybody for joining. See you in a month.
Thank you.
Ciao.
Bye.